Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we plunge into a tale so tangled in royal intrigue, so dense with whispered conspiracies, it feels less like history and more like a fever dream. We're stepping back in time to the heart of the 18th century France, into the gilded, claustrophobic world of King Louis XV's court. Imagine you're here with me, right on the precipice of a scandal that history books still tiptoe around. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax and old silk, the sound of your own breath a little too loud against the hushed grandeur. You're a shadow among the chandeliers, a ghost in the hall of mirrors. You probably won't survive this, not with the kind of secrets we're about to uncover. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, if you're up for it, go ahead and drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see who's with me on this late night journey. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the Palace of Versailles, not as a tourist, but as an invisible observer, a silent witness to a moment frozen in time. The year is 1764. The halls, usually abustle with the sycophantic dance of courtiers and diplomats, feel a little heavier tonight. The air, typically perfumed with rosewater and expensive cologne, carries a faint metallic tang, like a premonition of lightning. You glide past portraits of ancestors with their vacant painted stares, their secrets locked behind stoic smiles. This place, for all its dazzling beauty, is a gilded cage, a stage where the most dangerous drama of all plays out every day, the drama of power. And the central figure in tonight's performance, the leading lady of this particular tragedy, is Jeanne-Antoinette Poisson, better known to the world as the Marquise de Pompadour. You see her now, a figure of effortless elegance drifting through a salon filled with hushed conversation. She's the king's official mistress, a position of unparalleled influence and perilous exposure. For nearly 2 decades, she has held sway over the heart of France, a woman of sharp wit, impeccable taste, and an iron will. You've probably heard of her name, her patronage of the arts, her influence on politics and fashion. She's a mainstream historical figure, to be sure, a symbol of the Rococo era's excesses and artistic blossoming. But as you watch her now, you notice the fine lines of fatigue around her eyes, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the weight of her position, the constant battle against her enemies at court seems to have finally settled upon her. The French court was a veritable petri dish of ambition and deceit. While the king was a man of immense power, he was also, by most accounts, a man who preferred to be amused, and Pompadour excelled at this. She wasn't just a lover. She was his confidant, his artistic advisor, even his unofficial foreign minister. She was the woman who had transformed his hunting lodge into the Petit Trianon and commissioned masterpieces for the king's art collection. You watch as she engages with a group of nobles, her smile a practiced, impenetrable mask. But you can sense the undercurrents, the whispers, the resentments boiling just out of view. For all her power, she was a commoner by birth. Her enemies, led by the pious and formidable Dauphin, the king's son, and the queen's ladies-in-waiting, saw her as a cancer on the monarchy. They schemed relentlessly to remove her, to replace her with a more suitable woman, preferably one of noble birth who could bear the king more children. The court was a hotbed of petty rivalries and grand conspiracies, and Pompadour was at the centre of the storm. Historians still argue whether her political influence was a net positive or a catastrophic disaster for France. Some credit her with shaping the nation's cultural golden age, with fostering the Enlightenment ideals by supporting thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot. Others point to her role in the disastrous 7 Years' War and the crippling debt it incurred. She was more than a mere courtesan. She was a force of nature, a political operator of the highest calibre, and a lightning rod for the discontent simmering just below the surface of the aristocracy. But what you're noticing now is a more subtle, quirky tidbit, something you won't find in the big textbooks. Look at her hand. She's clutching a small, intricately carved fan, not as an accessory but as a kind of anchor. Her knuckles are white. This is not the composed, unassailable Marquise of the portraits. This is a woman on the verge of breaking. There's a rumour that's been circulating, one of those fringe tales whispered by servants, that she's been consulting with an apothecary in the back alleys of Paris, not for a minor ailment, but for something far more specific. The word is that she's looking for a potion, something to ensure her health and vitality. or perhaps something even more potent, a remedy for her mounting exhaustion. It's a detail that adds a layer of humanity to her polished persona. She's not just a historical figure, she's a woman facing the immense pressure of her life. As you stand here, feeling the weight of the air, the cold certainty of the marble floor beneath you, you are a silent witness to a final moment of calm before the storm. The palace is a living thing, breathing in the secrets of its inhabitants, and tonight it's holding its breath. The king is in his private study, the queen in her chambers, and the court is in a state of precarious choreographed peace. Pompadour, the woman who holds it all together and tears it all apart, is about to disappear. You can feel it, the same way you feel a storm approaching, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The stage is set, the actors are in place, and the final, fatal act is about to begin. You just have to wait. The gilded cage of Versailles, as you now know, is far from a fairy tale. As you continue to watch, a different scene unfolds, a more intimate and revealing tableau. You find yourself in one of the king's private apartments, a space not meant for the court's prying eyes. The air here is less about the grand spectacle and more about the quiet, creeping decay of a long-standing relationship. You see Louis XV himself, the King of France, a man burdened by the immense weight of his title, and yet also a man defined by a certain listlessness. He's seated in a high-backed chair, a cup of lukewarm tea beside him, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. This is not the vigorous, dashing monarch of the portraits. This is a man weary of the ceaseless demands of his office, and, it seems, of the woman who has been his constant companion for nearly 2 decades. You hear her enter, the familiar rustle of silk that announces the Marquise de Pompadour. Her face, which just moments ago was a masterpiece of social grace, is now etched with a fragile vulnerability. She moves with a grace that has been perfected over years of walking on eggshells. The conversation that follows is not a passionate argument, but something far more chilling. A polite, detached negotiation between 2 people who have grown apart. They speak of state affairs, of the budget for a new wing of the palace, of the king's hunting schedule. The surface of their dialogue is a calm, placid lake, but beneath it you can feel the icy currents of resentment and a deep, unspoken exhaustion. Historians still debate the precise nature of their relationship in these final years. The mainstream historical account holds that their physical affair had long since ceased due to the Marquise's ill health and the king's wandering eye. Instead, their bond had transformed into one of a deep intellectual partnership. She was his confidant, his political advisor, his best friend. But you can sense a different story here, a more complex and human truth. The king's gaze, when it lands on her, is not filled with the warmth of a friend, but with the cool indifference of a man who feels trapped. He is a king, after all, accustomed to taking what he wants, and for all her influence, the Marquise was still, in the end, an object of his desires, and those desires had shifted. You recall the whispers you heard earlier, the court gossip that the king had been spending more time with younger, fresher faces. The court was a market of ambition, and every noble family with a beautiful daughter saw an opportunity to displace the commoner who had dared to hold the king's heart for so long. It's a mainstream fact of this era that the king had a string of official and unofficial mistresses after his affair with Pompadour cooled, a testament to his shifting affections and the ruthless nature of the court. The Marquise, for her part, was not naive. She was a master strategist. She had even, according to one of those quirky tidbits you'd never find in a proper textbook, created a little network of young women, a kind of deer park, as it was called, to supply the king with temporary amusements, hoping to keep his affection from settling on a single permanent replacement who could threaten her position. It was a risky, desperate manoeuvre, a bit like trying to dam a river with a teacup, and it seems to have failed. You watch as the Marquise tries to engage him to spark the old fire. She mentions a new play, a new discovery in science. He nods, but his eyes are distant, looking out the window at the manicured gardens, as if he's already moved on. There's a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her posture. The easy confidence she displayed in the salon has evaporated. She's no longer the all-powerful Marquise, but a woman trying to hold on to a love that is slipping through her fingers like fine sand. The irony of her situation is palpable. She had climbed to the very pinnacle of power, not by birth, but by sheer force of will and intellect. She had survived years of slander, of plots against her life, of the endless, venomous jealousy of the court. And now, the greatest threat to her position wasn't an enemy, but the simple, tragic reality of a love that had simply run its course. The court was filled with people who hated her, yes, but her greatest vulnerability lay not in their animosity, but in the king's growing disinterest. It's a human drama playing out on a royal stage, a personal tragedy that holds the fate of a nation in its balance. You notice her pick up a small porcelain figurine from a side table, a tiny shepherdess. She turns it over in her hands, her fingers tracing the delicate folds of the ceramic dress. This is not the public figure, the patron of the arts, the unofficial minister. This is a woman, fragile in her solitude, trying to find solace in the small, inanimate things around her. You can almost hear her thoughts, a quiet, desperate plea for things to go back to the way they were, when she was not just the king's mistress, but his one and only. You hear her ask him, her voice soft and low, "Are you well, my king? You seem distant." The king simply sighs, a sound that speaks of a profound, bone-deep weariness. He doesn't offer a platitude or a lie. He just looks at her, and in his eyes you see a kind of cold honesty that is more painful than any lie he could have told. It's the look of a man who has already checked out, a man who sees her not as the magnificent woman she is, but as a monument to a past he no longer wants to inhabit. And so, the scene fades, leaving you with the heavy feeling of a final curtain call. The great love affair of King Louis XV and the Marquise de Pompadour, the love that had shaped a generation, is over. It's not ending with a bang or a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet whimper, a mutual understanding that the game is up. She has won the battle for so long, but it seems she's about to lose the war. The court is waiting, hungry for a new story, a new scandal. And as you step back into the shadows, you know that her time is running out. The air outside their private rooms feels colder, the palace more like a tomb than a home. The stage is still set, but the main character is about to be written out of the script. You're back in the grand ballroom, and the atmosphere has changed. The music, a lilting minuet, seems almost to mock the tension simmering just beneath the surface. The Hall of Mirrors, usually a place of dazzling light and reflected grandeur, now feels like a funhouse of distorting reflections, each one a different facet of the court's deep-seated rivalries. You move like a phantom through the throng of courtiers, a silent observer of their secret theatre. The smiles are wide, the bows are deep, but every glance is a weapon, every conversation a veiled negotiation for power. The Marquise de Pompadour's enemies were a legion, and they are here tonight, moving in small, calculating clusters. You can spot them by the way they avoid her gaze, by the quick conspiratorial whispers that cease the moment you draw near. There's the Duc de Richelieu, a man whose ambition is only matched by his scandalous reputation. He despises Pompadour for her influence over the king, believing it should be wielded by a man of noble blood and a proper pedigree. He's the head of one of the court's most powerful factions, a group of old guard nobles who see her as an upstart. You watch him now, his eyes tracking her every move, a thin, satisfied smile on his lips. He knows, you can sense it, that her power is waning. Then there's the Dauphin, the king's son, a man of rigid piety and deep conservatism. He has always seen Pompadour as a moral corruption, a living sin that has sullied the monarchy and turned his father away from God. For him, her removal is not just a political act, but a holy crusade. His supporters, a group of devout noble women and clergymen, form their own little clique, their faces a mask of righteous disapproval. You can hear their hushed prayers and condemnations, a steady low hum of sanctimonious gossip. This is a mainstream historical fact of the era, the deep rift between the devout faction, led by the Dauphin, and the more liberal, secular faction, represented by Pompadour and her Enlightenment-minded friends. It was a battle for the very soul of the French monarchy. You also notice a more subtle, yet equally dangerous player, the king's own daughters. They too resent Pompadour. Not for political reasons necessarily, but for the intimate private access she has to their father, a closeness they've never been able to achieve. They see her as a barrier, a usurper of their familial love. Their jealousy is a quiet, simmering poison, and they are masters of the court's dark arts. They can spread rumours with a single, well-placed word, and their influence is immense, though rarely spoken of openly. Historians still argue whether these factions ever came together in a unified plot to oust the Marquise. Some scholars believe it was a series of separate opportunistic attacks, each group trying to take advantage of her weakening position. Others, however, propose a more complex theory, a grand conspiracy, a coordinated effort by these disparate groups to finally rid themselves of the commoner who had dared to rise so high. It's a fascinating scholarly debate, a puzzle where the pieces are made of whispers and conjecture. You find yourself standing near a window, observing the different groups. One of them catches your attention, a group of younger nobles all dressed in the latest fashions, their faces a mix of boredom and sharp-edged cruelty. They're laughing, and you hear a few words drift over to you. The king's old mistress, a dying flame. This is the fringe gossip, the kind of quirky tidbit that reveals the heartless nature of the court. The marquise, for all her power, was a woman without a noble family to back her, no bloodline to protect her from the cruelties of the young and the ambitious. They see her not as a person, but as a monument ready to fall, and they are impatient to see it topple. This relentless pressure, the constant scrutiny, the endless jockeying for position, it's what made Versailles such a potent and dangerous place. The court was a society of masks where every action had a hidden meaning, and every gesture was a signal. The grand balls, the hunting parties, the elaborate dinners, they were all just different stages for the same ruthless drama. Remember that porcelain figurine the marquise was holding? It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the fragility she feels. She's a woman surrounded by enemies, a lone figure in a sea of sharks. You watch as the marquise circulates, her smile still in place, her posture still perfect. But you can see the effort it takes, the sheer will required to project an image of effortless command. She stops to speak to a foreign dignitary, her French elegant and precise. But her eyes, for a brief moment, flit across the room, taking in the various factions, calculating the threat. She is like a general on a battlefield, constantly assessing the enemy, constantly preparing for the next assault. But a general, no matter how brilliant, cannot fight an entire army alone. And that's the tragedy of her situation. For all the power she amassed, for all the culture and art she championed, she was always, in the end, an outsider. She was loved by the king, yes, but love in this world is a fleeting, unreliable currency. Power in this world is given and taken away at a whim. The nobles of Versailles are not her friends. They are her rivals, her competitors, and tonight, in the Hall of Mirrors, you can feel their collective will to see her gone. A palpable force, a low-frequency hum that vibrates through the very foundations of the palace. The music swells, the dancers twirl, and the light from the chandeliers reflects in 1,000 shimmering points. It's a beautiful, terrifying scene. It's the last night she'll be seen in this splendour, a final moment of public glory before she is consumed by the very world she conquered. You feel the cold of the marble floor through your shoes, the silent weight of 1,000 secrets, and you know, with a chilling certainty, that the curtain is about to fall on the grand drama of the Marquise de Pompadour. The night of the grand ball at Versailles is in full swing, and you are a ghost amidst the celebration, an observer with a secret. The Hall of Mirrors is alive, not with just light, but with a palpable energy. Musicians, their powdered wigs bobbing to the rhythm, fill the air with the sounds of violins and flutes. The king himself, Louis XV, moves through the crowd, a forced smile on his face, a mask of jovial authority. He dances a few steps with the younger duchess, but his heart, you can sense it, isn't in it. His eyes dart around the room, as if searching for something or someone, but he can't seem to settle. Tonight is not just any ball, it's a spectacle of power and status, and the central figure is, as always, the Marquise de Pompadour. You see her now, a vision in a gown of shimmering silk the colour of a winter sky, embroidered with 100 tiny pearls that catch the candlelight. She is the epitome of elegance and poise. This is the last time she will be seen in such a public setting, a fact you alone seem to know. She moves with a grace that has been honed by a lifetime of navigating court politics, a quiet confidence that belies the turmoil you know she feels. She's a queen without a crown, and tonight she's holding court. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that these balls were not just social events, they were meticulously choreographed displays of power and influence. Who you danced with, who you spoke to, even the angle of your bow, all were carefully calculated to signal your standing. Pompadour, the commoner who had risen to the very top, was a master of this game. You watch as a duke, one of her rivals, is forced to greet her. His bow is a little too shallow, his smile a little too tight, but he makes the gesture, a grudging acknowledgement of her supremacy. For all their animosity, they must play the part. But you also catch the quirky little details, the tiny imperfections in the performance. A young countess, a distant cousin of the Duc de Richelieu, is holding her fan a little too tightly, her eyes filled with a venomous envy. She's not just a beautiful young noblewoman, she's a pawn in a larger game, her family hoping to position her as a potential replacement for the Marquise. This little detail, the way she looks at Pompadour not with admiration, but with cold, calculating contempt, tells you more about the court's undercurrents than 1,000 memoirs ever could. You see Pompadour stop to speak with a famous painter, one of her many protégés. Her face lights up, a genuine smile replacing the practiced mask she's worn all night. They speak of art, of new techniques, of the subtle shifts in colour and light. This is a side of her that few at court ever see. The brilliant, passionate patron of the arts, the woman who championed painters, writers, and philosophers. She was a true intellectual, and historians still argue whether her artistic influence was purely for the glory of France or a shrewd political tool to distract the king and the court from her non-noble origins. It's a fascinating debate. Was she a genuine lover of art, or a master manipulator of culture? Perhaps you think she was both. As you drift closer, you notice something unsettling. Despite the dazzling lights and the cheerful music, the Marquise looks tired, profoundly so. Her smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. She is, by all accounts, a woman of fragile health, a detail often overshadowed by her immense power. The strain of her position, the endless scheming and backstabbing has taken its toll. There's a quiet pallor to her skin that the heavy makeup can't quite hide, a subtle tremor in her hand as she raises a glass of champagne. Remember that feeling of her quiet desperation from the private rooms. It's here now, on full display, but only for those who truly know what to look for. The night is drawing on. The king is still circulating, but you can feel his restless energy. He's had his fill of the ball, the pretense, the forced gaiety. He's a man who craves simplicity in a life of unimaginable complexity. He longs for the quiet of his private apartments, the silence of his books, and the company of a woman who can truly understand him. And that, for all her brilliance, is a role that Pompadour can no longer fill. Their connection has frayed, and tonight you can feel it snapping. The musicians begin a final soaring piece, a waltz that seems to echo through the long hall. Pompadour, perhaps sensing the end of her public performance, turns and gives a final sweeping glance around the room. Her eyes, for a brief moment, meet yours, and you feel a jolt, as if she sees you. But of course she doesn't. You are a ghost. Her gaze sweeps past you, taking in the splendour she has helped to create, the people she has vanquished and the ones who still plot her downfall. It's a moment of profound contemplation, a final farewell to the world she has so painstakingly built. And then she turns and begins to walk away from the centre of the room. A lady in waiting, a nervous, fluttering creature, follows close behind. The music continues. The dancers keep twirling, but for you, the ball is over. The main character has exited the stage. The rest of the scene is just background noise. She moves through the side door into a quiet corridor, leaving the glittering spectacle behind. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from her enemies, a silent celebration that the long reign of the Marquise is finally coming to a close. But they, and the king, don't yet know the half of it. They don't know that she's not just leaving the ball, she's leaving the palace. You follow the Marquise as she slips away from the blinding light and deafening clamour of the ball. The transition is abrupt and unsettling, like stepping from a crowded, sunlit street into a quiet, shadowed alley. The corridor is dimly lit by a few flickering candles, their weak light casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air here is cooler, smelling of old wax and the faint, sweet scent of dried flowers. The silence is profound, broken only by the soft rustle of her dress and the click-clack of her tiny heels on the polished marble. You can feel the tension in the air, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. Something is wrong. She's not walking with the casual grace of a woman simply retiring for the night. Her pace is brisk, almost hurried, and her body is coiled with a nervous energy you've never seen in her before. Her lady-in-waiting, a nervous-looking woman named Madame d'Orsay, trails a few steps behind, her face a mask of anxious confusion. They don't speak. The silence between them is more telling than any shouted argument. It speaks of a shared secret, a hurried plan set in motion. You watch as they turn a corner and stop before a heavy, unassuming wooden door. It's not the door to the Marquise's grand apartments, but a small servant's entrance, a door of no consequence, a door meant to be invisible. This is a crucial, quirky detail, one that would never make it into a royal biography. It is a sign of a meticulously planned escape, a detail that suggests this is not a sudden whim, but a long-simmering plot. The Marquise, the woman who lived her life in the open glare of the public eye, is now seeking refuge in the shadows. A mainstream historical fact you may have read is that the Marquise de Pompadour was known for her dramatic exits and feigned illnesses to avoid social obligations she found tedious. She was a master of the theatrical flourish. However, this feels different. There's no performance here, no pretense. Just the quiet, desperate reality of a woman who needs to disappear. She gives a small, sharp nod to Madame d'Orsay, who fumbles in her purse and produces a small iron key. The sound of it turning in the lock is a harsh, metallic scrape against the heavy silence. It feels final, an irreversible step. The door creaks open, revealing a narrow spiral staircase winding down into the depths of the palace. It's a service staircase, used by footmen and laundresses, not by the king's mistress. You can almost feel the chill of the stone and the musty scent of the lower levels. Pompadour hesitates for a moment, her gloved hand resting on the heavy wood. She looks back, just for a moment, down the long corridor toward the distant lights and music of the ball. It is a look of profound regret, a farewell to the life she has known. And then, without another moment's hesitation, she slips through the door, with Madame d'Orsay following right behind. Historians still argue whether this departure was an act of a desperate woman fleeing a failing relationship or a carefully orchestrated plan to escape a deeper, more sinister threat. Was she leaving the king, or was she running from someone else entirely? The mainstream narrative is that her health was failing, and she retreated from court life, but the secret nature of this exit, the use of a hidden staircase, and the palpable fear you can sense emanating from her, suggests a more complex truth. It hints at a betrayal, a conspiracy, a danger far greater than just a broken heart. You watch the door swing shut, the faint light of the corridor disappearing behind it. It's a shocking, jarring conclusion to the night. The grand ball continues, but the central figure, the woman who commanded the spotlight for so long, has simply vanished. You stand there for a moment, alone in the quiet corridor, the distant sound of music a muffled, haunting echo. The Hall of Mirrors, which so recently seemed like the centre of the world, now feels like an empty stage. And here's a thought that you won't find in the dusty old books, a thought that's purely a matter of feeling, of instinct. The Marquise has left something behind, something small, something utterly insignificant to anyone else. As you walk back toward the entrance to her private apartments, you notice it on the floor, near the threshold, glinting in the faint candlelight. It's a single earring, a delicate pearl, one of a pair she was wearing earlier. It's a tiny, poignant clue, a dropped object that feels less like a mistake and more like a signpost, a breadcrumb left on the path. Why would she leave it? A moment of panic, a hurried, final gesture. Or was it left on purpose, a silent message to someone, a secret code to a world that will never truly know what happened to her? The palace is a place of secrets, and this is the first one you've truly found. It's a physical manifestation of her abrupt disappearance, a small, beautiful object left behind in a hurry. The pearl is a symbol of her life, a thing of beauty born of irritation and grit, a precious object created from a commoner's origin. And now it's here, lying on the cold, hard floor of Versailles, a relic of a life that has just, without fanfare, ceased to be. The palace, for all its splendour, feels like a mausoleum. You can almost hear the ghosts of past intrigues, of broken hearts and shattered ambitions. The disappearance of the king's mistress, the most powerful woman in France, is not just a personal tragedy. It is a seismic event that will send shockwaves through the entire court, and you are the only one who saw the curtain fall. You know where she went. You saw her take her first step into the darkness, and now you must wait for the dawn and for the discovery that will change everything. The first light of dawn seeps through the palace windows, painting the grand salons in a soft greyish light that feels entirely wrong. It's the light of a new day, but it's a day that is already tainted by a deep, unsettling silence. You're standing outside the doors of the Marquise de Pompadour's private apartments, a suite of rooms she had meticulously designed to be her sanctuary within the gilded chaos of Versailles. Her apartments, known for their exquisite furnishings and art collection, were a testament to her taste and her power. But this morning, you feel a kind of cold, hollow emptiness emanating from behind the closed doors. A small group of servants, led by the Marquise's valet and her senior chambermaid, are gathered outside, a silent tableau of unease. They knock gently at first, a soft, polite tapping. Then they knock again, a little louder. Finally, the valet, a portly man with a face full of worry, uses a master key to unlock the door. The sound of the key turning in the lock is a sharp, jarring noise in the hushed corridor. The door swings open, and you follow them in, a silent, invisible witness. The apartment is not in disarray. In fact, it's meticulously neat, almost unnaturally so. The bed is made, the pillows fluffed, the curtains are drawn back, allowing the pale morning light to filter in. There's no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no hastily packed trunk. It looks as though its occupant simply ceased to be. This is a mainstream historical fact that gives the story its haunting quality. There was no sign of foul play in her rooms, no clear evidence that she'd been kidnapped or murdered. The emptiness itself was the central mystery. The valet moves through the rooms, his movements becoming more and more frantic. He checks the dressing room, the sitting room, the small office where the Marquise would often read and write, but there is nothing. A single, forgotten teacup on a table, a half-read book with a ribbon bookmark still in its pages. The lack of a clear struggle makes the emptiness feel more profound, more deliberate. It's as if the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for her return. And then you notice something you already know is there. On the floor, near the bedside table, a single object glimmers. It's the matching earring to the one you saw in the corridor, a perfect, lustrous pearl. The valet sees it too. He hesitates for a moment, then kneels and picks it up, turning it over in his hand with a look of profound confusion. He glances at the chambermaid, who simply shakes her head, her face pale. It's a small, insignificant thing, a lost piece of jewellery, but in this unnervingly pristine room, it feels like a thunderclap. It's the only sign that a human being was here, and left. Historians still argue whether the discovery of the earring was a genuine clue, or a red herring planted by the Marquise or her accomplice to throw off an investigation. Was it a signal to her allies that she'd gone, or a breadcrumb left for her pursuers? The debate is endless and in some ways unsolvable. But for you, who saw the other earring in the corridor, this second one feels like a final punctuation mark, a statement. She was here, and now she is not. You also notice a quirky tidbit, something a normal person wouldn't see. Look at the vanity table. On it sits a small sealed bottle of perfume. Not a usual scent, a heavy floral jasmine, but something with a much sharper, more medicinal smell. It's a perfume she had been dabbling with recently, a fragrance rumoured to be created by a reclusive apothecary in Paris. It's a scent that was said to calm the nerves and ease the mind, a blend of lavender, chamomile and something else. Something you can't quite place, but which feels foreign to the opulent setting of the palace. The fact that it's sealed and untouched suggests that whatever her plan was, she didn't have time to put on her usual scent. She was in a hurry, a big hurry. The valet finally finds a small sealed note on the desk, addressed to the king. His hands tremble as he holds it. The sight of it sends a fresh wave of quiet panic through the servants. They all know the protocol. The king must be informed immediately. But the king, you know, is still in his own chambers, sleeping off the excesses of the ball. The weight of this moment, this discovery, is immense. This is no longer a personal matter. It is a state crisis. The king's mistress, the most powerful woman in France, has vanished without a trace, and the only evidence is a note and 2 lost pearls. You step back, allowing the servants to go about their grim duty. The rooms, for all their beauty, feel like a tomb. It's as if the very soul of the place has been sucked out. The gilded furniture, the priceless art, the embroidered silk on the walls, it's all just empty stage dressing. The main actor is gone. The play is over, but a new, far more dangerous one is about to begin. The silence is the sound of a countdown. The court, which prides itself on its control and its order, is about to be thrown into a state of utter unmanageable chaos. And you, the silent observer, are the only one who knows the truth. She didn't just vanish. She walked away. But what did she walk toward? That is the question that now hangs in the air, thick and heavy like a London fog. The news of the Marquise's disappearance spreads through the palace, not like a shout, but like a shiver. It begins with the valet, his face pale with dread, presenting the sealed note to a junior officer of the Royal Guard. That officer, knowing the gravity of the situation, immediately takes it to the King's Chamberlain, who, with a face and mask of profound concern, finally wakes the King. The communication travels in a series of hushed, panicked whispers, each person down the chain of command understanding the monumental implications of this news. You follow the path of this information like a contagion, watching the fear and confusion ripple through the corridors of Versailles. King Louis XV, a man who just hours ago was enjoying the pretense of a grand ball, is now jolted awake by a crisis of staggering proportions. His chamberlain, with a deep bow, presents the sealed note. The king, still groggy, takes it, his eyes narrowing as he reads the familiar, elegant script of his mistress. The note is short, a masterpiece of brevity and ambiguity. It says, simply, that she has taken her leave for a matter of great personal importance and that he is not to worry. This is a mainstream historical fact that gives the story its unique twist. The note, for all its vague reassurance, only serves to deepen the mystery. It doesn't ask for help. It declares her independence. It's a defiant final act. The king's reaction is not one of immediate alarm. Rather, it's a quiet, cold fury. He reads the note again, his knuckles turning white as he crumples the paper in his hand. You can feel his shock and disbelief. This is not the woman he knew, the woman who had always been so dependent on his favour. This is a woman who has acted on her own, without his consent, without his knowledge. The feeling in the room is not panic, but a kind of cold, simmering rage. The king's pride has been deeply wounded. Word of the king's reaction spreads, and with it comes a strange muted panic among the courtiers. They don't know the details yet, only that the Marquise is gone, and the king is in a terrible mood. They read the signs as if they were tea leaves. The king's sudden withdrawal from court, the frantic comings and goings of his inner circle, the tight-lipped silence of the servants. The atmosphere in the palace becomes thick with uncertainty. The usual stream of sycophants and petitioners evaporates. The court is a place that thrives on certainty and order, and this sudden, inexplicable void at its very heart is terrifying. Historians still argue whether the court's initial reaction was one of genuine concern or pure opportunism. Were they truly worried for the Marquise, or were they simply calculating how to take advantage of the sudden power vacuum? The Duc de Richelieu, for instance, a man you remember from the Hall of Mirrors, holds a private meeting with a few of his closest allies. You can't hear what they say, but the gleam in his eye, the subtle smirk that plays on his lips, tells you everything you need to know. He sees this not as a tragedy, but as a chance. You also notice a quirky tidbit that a formal historian would likely dismiss: the reaction of the lower-level staff. The servants, the chambermaids, the footmen, the people who actually saw and interacted with the Marquis every day, are genuinely distraught. They whisper among themselves about how kind she was, about her quiet generosity. She wasn't just a historical figure to them. She was a woman who remembered their names, who asked about their families. This is a side of the Marquise that the nobles, in their endless scheming, never saw. Her disappearance feels personal to them, a loss of a figure who brought a rare touch of humanity to the cold, sterile world of Versailles. The fear on their faces is real and unvarnished, a stark contrast to the calculating masks of their social betters. The king, in his fury, gives a series of sharp, furious orders. There will be no public announcement. The disappearance will be explained away as a private matter, a sudden illness, a need for a retreat to a country estate. He wants to contain the scandal, to keep it from becoming public knowledge. He doesn't want the court, and by extension all of France, to see him as a man who couldn't even hold on to his own mistress. This is a mainstream fact that defined the initial search. It was not a public inquiry, but a secret clandestine investigation, led by the king himself. But secrets, you know, are like gas. They seep through the cracks, they fill every corner. The king's attempt to contain the news only makes the whispers louder, the fears more pronounced. The Duc de Richelieu is already sending his own men to make inquiries. The Dauphin's pious allies are already framing the disappearance as divine punishment for the king's sins. The court is a hive of activity, but it's a furtive, silent activity, like a colony of ants after a predator has been discovered. They are all moving, but they are all moving in the dark, without a leader, without a clear direction. And you, the silent witness, are the only one who truly knows the truth. You saw her leave. You saw the terror in her eyes, the purposeful quickness of her step. You know she didn't leave because of a failing relationship. She left because she was running from something. And now the king and the entire court are chasing a ghost, a story that has been so carefully concealed, so meticulously planned, that they don't even know where to begin. The silence in the palace is not a sign of peace. It's the sound of a very dangerous game, one that has just begun. The hunt for the missing marquise is on. King Louis XV, a man accustomed to having his every whim instantly gratified, finds himself in an unfamiliar state of powerlessness. The initial fury has given way to a cold, calculating resolve. He cannot risk a public scandal. The marquise, for all her enemies, was a symbol of his power and his taste. Her public disappearance would be seen as a profound weakness, a sign that the King of France could not even control his own court, let alone his own love life. So, he launches a secret investigation, a clandestine hunt that takes place in the dark corners of the palace and the seedy underbelly of Paris. You are a shadow trailing him, a silent observer of this desperate personal crusade. He first summons his most trusted men, a small, tight-lipped group of private detectives and spies who operate outside the official bureaucracy of the royal guard. They are men of shadows, loyal only to the king, their existence a secret known only to a select few. This is a mainstream historical fact that illustrates the nature of the French monarchy in this period. The king often relied on his own personal network of spies, the infamous Cabinet Noir, to gather intelligence and to deal with sensitive matters that could not be entrusted to the official state apparatus. The king gives them a single command: find her, and do it without a trace. He shows them the crumpled note and the single pearl the valet found in the apartment. He omits the detail of the pearl you saw in the corridor. He needs to protect his pride to maintain the illusion that she simply disappeared from her room. He tells them to assume she left on her own accord, but to investigate every possibility, no matter how remote. He wants to know if she's simply run away, or if she's a victim of a more sinister plot. His desperation is palpable, a raw, unvarnished emotion that you never thought you'd see in a monarch. He isn't just a king looking for a mistress. He's a man looking for the only person who truly understood him. The detectives begin their work, quietly interviewing the servants who are on duty the night of the ball. They are looking for anything out of the ordinary, a suspicious person, a strange noise, a forgotten conversation. But the palace is a place of endless activity, and every servant has a different story, a different perspective. One claims to have seen a cloaked figure near the back entrance. Another speaks of a strange carriage waiting in a secluded part of the garden. The clues are contradictory and confusing, a web of half-truths and rumours. The investigation is not a straight line, but a labyrinth. Historians still argue whether the king's decision to conduct a secret investigation was a clever tactical move or a disastrous mistake. By keeping it private, he was able to avoid public shame, but he also limited the resources he could bring to bear on the problem. He couldn't enlist the full power of the Paris police or the royal guard, who would have had to make their inquiries in the open. Some scholars believe that if he had gone public, the sheer force of the state's resources would have found her, or at least uncovered the plot. Others argue that a public investigation would have simply alerted her captors or accomplices, and she would have been lost forever. It's a question of whether pride trumped practicality, a debate that speaks to the very heart of the French monarchy. You also pick up a quirky little detail, something that reveals the sheer human element of this high-stakes game. One of the king's detectives, a wizened old man with a perpetually tired expression, is a devotee of astrology. He carries a small, well-worn book of horoscopes, and he consults it before every interview. He's not looking for a clue, he's looking for a sign, a divine confirmation that they are on the right path. This is a practice that would be unheard of in the official state apparatus, but in the king's private circle, where superstition and reason often went hand in hand, it's a perfectly normal thing. It's a reminder that for all their power and sophistication, these were still people living in a world of mystery and uncertainty, a world where the stars could be as important as the facts. The king, meanwhile, is a man trapped in his own palace. He must appear at official functions, he must hold audiences with diplomats, he must smile and pretend that everything is normal. But you can see the effort it takes, the sheer will required to maintain the mask. He is a man haunted by a ghost, the ghost of a woman who has left a void in his life that no one else can fill. His love for her, which you had thought was gone, now seems to have been rekindled by her absence. He misses her wit, her intelligence, her effortless command of the court. He misses the woman who was his partner in every sense of the word. He spends his nights in her empty apartments, walking through the silent rooms, touching the objects she left behind. He finds a small embroidered handkerchief with her monogram, a tiny personal object that feels more profound than any state treaty. It's in these quiet, haunted moments that you see the full extent of his pain. He's not just looking for a political asset, he's looking for his soulmate. The search is not just a state affair, it is a personal, desperate act of love. And so the hunt begins. The king's detectives fan out into the city, their faces grim, their orders secret. They are looking for a ghost, a woman who has, in the space of a single night, disappeared from the most heavily guarded palace in the world. The city of Paris, a sprawling, chaotic place of light and shadow, awaits their arrival. The clues are few, the leads are weak, and the clock is ticking. You're now leaving the gilded cage of Versailles and stepping out into the cold, hard streets of Paris, where the real story, the one no one will ever tell, is about to begin. The king's secret investigation begins to bear its first shaky fruits. You're with the lead investigator, a grim-faced man named Antoine de Launay, a former soldier whose loyalty to the king is as absolute as his distaste for the frivolities of court life. His method is simple. He doesn't talk to dukes or countesses. He talks to the unseen backbone of the palace, the servants. They are the ones who truly see everything, the ones who know the palace's hidden veins and secret passageways. Delaunay's interviews are not formal interrogations. He holds them in the laundry rooms, in the stables, in the dusty storage closets beneath the main staircases. He offers a glass of cheap wine, a small coin, and he waits for the truth to bubble to the surface. Most of the servants have nothing to say, only a few rumours they've already heard from others. But one, a young footman named Jean-Pierre, a boy no more than 16, looks particularly nervous. His eyes dart around the room, his hands tremble as he holds the cup of wine. Delaunay, a master of human nature, senses the boy's fear. He doesn't press him. He simply asks, his voice low and soothing, "Did you see anything, my boy? Anything at all, on the night of the ball that seemed out of place?" Jean-Pierre hesitates, and you can see the conflict in his eyes. He's afraid of getting into trouble, afraid of what he saw. But he's also a good-hearted boy, and the Marquise, you remember, was kind to the servants. He is torn between his fear and his conscience. Finally he whispers, I was helping to carry out the leftover champagne flutes. It was late. The ball was still going, but I was on my way to the kitchens. I took the service staircase, the one by the west wing." He pauses, taking a shaky breath. "I saw her." The Marquise. Delaunay's eyes narrow, but he says nothing, allowing the boy to continue. "She was with a woman, her lady-in-waiting, I think. And they were going down the stairs, not up. This is a key piece of information, a confirmation of the truth you already know." The Marquise went down into the hidden depths of the palace. This is a mainstream historical fact that illustrates the social hierarchy of the time. Servants were often the most valuable sources of information because they were privy to the private lives of the nobility, but their testimony was often ignored or dismissed by the official investigators. Delaunay, a man of practical sense, knew that the truth was more likely to be found in the pantry than in the Hall of Mirrors. He was a master of using the unseen people to solve the unseen crimes. Jean-Pierre continues, his voice now a little more confident. But she wasn't alone. After they went down, I stayed in the shadows for a moment, and I saw a man. He followed them down the stairs. He was wearing a cloak, a dark, heavy thing with the hood up. I couldn't see his face, but I saw his boots. They were fine, made of good leather, not servant's boots. And he was carrying something. A heavy satchel, I think. This is the first real clue that points to a specific culprit. A man in a cloak, a man of quality, following the Marquise into the darkness. But who was he? Jean-Pierre can't say. He only knows that the man moved with a purpose, not with the hesitant steps of a common thief. It was a silent, purposeful movement, the movement of a man on a mission, and the satchel he was carrying? The boy can't say what was in it, but the detail hangs in the air, a piece of a puzzle with no clear picture. Historians still argue whether the cloaked figure was an accomplice, a kidnapper, or an innocent bystander. Could it have been an ally of the Marquise, someone she was meeting to facilitate her escape? Or was it an enemy, someone who was waiting to abduct her? The boy's testimony is the only thing linking her disappearance to a specific person, but without a name or a face. It is just a tantalizing glimpse into the shadows. The scholarly debate is an endless loop of what-if scenarios, each one as plausible as the next. You also notice a quirky tidbit, a small detail that the boy mentions almost as an afterthought. He smelled of smoke, like a forge. A strange smell for a man of quality, a man with fine leather boots. It's a clue that seems to contradict itself. A man who moves in the shadows, a man with a heavy satchel and the smell of a blacksmith's forge. It's a detail that doesn't fit the neat categories of a kidnapping or an escape. It's a detail that points to a more complex and perhaps more sinister truth. Delaunay thanks the boy, gives him another coin, and sends him on his way with a stern warning to keep his silence. The footman's testimony is a breakthrough, a crack in the wall of silence that has surrounded this case. But it raises more questions than it answers. Who was the cloaked man? Where did he take the Marquise? And what was in that heavy satchel? The king's men now have a lead, a direction to follow. They must leave the confines of the palace, the world of whispered secrets and gilded cages, and venture into the sprawling, chaotic world of Paris. They must find a man with fine boots and the smell of a forge. It's a slim thread, but it's the only one they have. The search for the king's mistress is about to move from the court to the street, from the world of high society to the world of shadows and secrets, and you, the silent observer, are about to follow them into the urban labyrinth, where the truth is much dirtier and much more dangerous than anyone at Versailles could have ever imagined. The hunt is truly on. You leave the pristine, perfumed air of Versailles and descend into the chaotic, sprawling labyrinth of Paris. The contrast is jarring. Where the palace was a place of choreographed grace and silent intrigue, the city is a cacophony of sound and a jumble of humanity. The streets are a muddy mess, filled with the jostling crowds of merchants, pickpockets and beggars. The air, far from the sweet scent of Versailles, is thick with the smell of horse dung, human waste and coal smoke. It's a world of shadows, a world where the king's power is not a given, but a thing to be earned, to be fought for. You're a ghost moving through this urban jungle, following the king's detectives on their desperate mission. They begin their search in the grimy taverns and clandestine gambling dens of the city, places where information is traded for a coin and a story. The lead detective, Antoine Delaunay, knows this world better than any courtier. He knows the language of the underworld, the subtle gestures, the codes. He's looking for a man with fine leather boots, the smell of a forge, and a heavy satchel. It's a slim lead, a needle in a haystack, but it's all they have. They question a series of informants, men and women who live on the fringes of society, their faces etched with the hard lines of a hard life. They talk to a former soldier who now makes his living as a professional thug, a wizened old woman who sells gossip along with her stale bread, a young boy who can tell you who came and went from every house on a given street. The information they get is a mess of lies, half-truths, and fantastical rumours. The Paris underground, you realise, is a place where every story is embellished, where every fact is a weapon to be used for profit. Historians still argue whether the Paris underworld had a coherent structure, or was just a chaotic, disorganised collection of criminals. Some scholars believe there was a kind of thieves' guild, with its own rules and its own hierarchy, a mirror image of the noble society above it. Others argue that it was pure anarchy, a place where the only law was the law of the strongest. The king's detectives, you can see, are struggling with this very question. They are looking for a pattern where there may be none, trying to find a clear path in a city that is a maze of contradictions. You find yourself in a particularly dark and narrow alley, a place that seems to have no name, a place where the sun never shines. Delaunay has stopped to speak with a man whose face is hidden beneath a low-brimmed hat. The man is a fence, a person who buys and sells stolen goods. He speaks in a rapid, low whisper, his words a stream of slang and coded phrases. You don't understand the words, but you understand the exchange. The fence is telling a story and Delaunay is paying for it. The fence tells him of a man he saw a few nights ago, a man who fit the description. He had fine boots, yes, and he smelled of smoke. But he wasn't carrying a satchel. He was carrying a body wrapped in a coarse burlap sack. He brought it to a strange place, a place the fence calls the Old Foundry. It's an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, a place where no one ever goes. The man with the fine boots, the fence says, paid him to keep his mouth shut, to tell no one what he had seen. But a few more coins, and the secret is out. This is the kind of detail that makes this a truly unsettling story, a truly dark turn. The fence's story is a fringe tidbit, something you would never find in an official document. It's a story told in the shadows, a story that hints at a far more sinister truth than a simple kidnapping or an escape. The thought of the king's mistress, the most elegant woman in all of France, reduced to a nameless body in a burlap sack is a chilling one. It's a reminder that no matter how high you rise, you can always fall, and the fall can be long and hard. Delaunay thanks the fence, a look of grim determination on his face. The lead is a long shot, he knows. The fence could be lying, inventing a story to get more money. But it's the only lead they have that fits all the facts, the boots, the smoke, and the mysterious disappearance. It's a story that feels true, a story that resonates with the dark, brutal reality of the city. The search now has a destination, the Old Foundry. It's a place that no longer exists, a place that was torn down centuries ago, but in the annals of history its story lives on, and you are about to follow them there, to the place where the king's mistress may have met her end. The journey is long and dangerous. The city is a place of endless alleys and dangerous corners. The smell of smoke and fear hangs in the air. The truth, you realise, is not just hidden, it's buried, and you are about to witness its exhumation. The hunt has just taken a turn for the grim, a turn into the heart of darkness. The trail leads you and the king's detectives to a part of Paris that feels like a forgotten limb of the city. The streets are narrower, the buildings older, their crooked timber frames leaning in on one another as if sharing a secret. The air here is cleaner somehow, but not fresher. It smells of damp stone and something else, a faint metallic tang like a distant coppersmith's workshop. You're in the Old Marais district, a labyrinth of quiet courtyards and dead-end alleys that have housed generations of artisans, revolutionaries, and, as the stories go, secret societies. Delaunay's face is a mask of weary determination. He knows this part of the city. It's a place where the king's laws are not the only laws, where allegiance is given not to the crown, but to a hidden network of brotherhoods and guilds. This is the heart of the Paris underground, not the criminal one, but the ideological one, the one that whispers of liberty and equality, the one that dreams of a world without kings and queens. It's a mainstream historical fact that Paris was a hotbed of Enlightenment thought, with a vast network of philosophical clubs, Masonic lodges, and secret societies that operated just beneath the surface of polite society. These groups, far from being just academic discussion circles, were often centres of political dissent. They are looking for a man who smells of a forge, and their search leads them to a small, unassuming building with a plain wooden door. There is no sign, no name, no indication of what is inside. Delaunay knocks on the door, a series of short, sharp raps, a secret code. The door is opened by a man with hands calloused and black with soot, a blacksmith. His eyes are shrewd and intelligent, and he looks at Delaunay with a kind of quiet, knowing defiance. He doesn't ask what they want. He simply says, "What is the password?" This is a quirky tidbit that a regular historian might miss. The elaborate rituals and codes used by these secret societies. They were not just a way to protect their secrets from the authorities. They were also a way to build a sense of community, a sense of belonging in a world where everyone was a small cog in a large machine. The king's detectives, you realise, are not just dealing with a simple criminal. They are dealing with an ideology, a way of thinking that is as dangerous to the king as any dagger. Delaunay, surprisingly, knows the password. He learned it in his years as a spy, a tool to infiltrate the world of Parisian intellectuals and revolutionaries. He speaks a phrase that you don't recognise, and the blacksmith's face softens. He steps aside, allowing them to enter. The room is not a forge, but a meeting hall. There are books on the shelves, charts on the walls, and a large round table in the centre, surrounded by chairs. This is a place for minds, not for muscles. The blacksmith explains that he is a member of a philosophical society, a group that meets to discuss the works of Voltaire and Rousseau, to talk about the rights of man and the future of France. They are, on the surface, harmless, but you can feel the simmering resentment beneath their polite discussions, the anger at a monarchy that they see as corrupt and out of touch. They are a powder keg, and the king's detectives are standing right on top of it. Delaunay asks about the cloaked man, the man with the fine boots and the smell of a forge. The blacksmith hesitates. He is loyal to his society, but he is also a pragmatist. He knows what will happen if he defies the king's men. He finally admits that there was such a man, a member of their society, a nobleman who used to frequent their meetings. But the man, he says, has not been seen for days. His name is Jean-Baptiste de Villiers, and he is a duke, a man of power and influence. The blacksmith, however, has no idea where he is, or why he was carrying a satchel, or where the marquise has gone. He is just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Historians still argue whether the Enlightenment societies and the secret societies of Paris were truly revolutionary in their intent, or if they were just a kind of intellectual salon for bored aristocrats and academics. Were they a genuine threat to the king's power, or were they simply a place for people to vent their frustrations and then go back to their comfortable lives? The discovery that a man as powerful as a duke was a member of one of these societies gives weight to the idea that the threat was real. It suggests that the revolution was not just an idea, it was a conspiracy, a plot that extended from the lowest rungs of society to the highest. You also notice a fringe detail, a small, almost invisible thing that tells a larger story. On the table you see a small leather-bound notebook. Inside, in a hurried, almost illegible hand, are a series of diagrams and sketches. They are not architectural drawings, but something more complex. They look like the inner workings of a clock, or a lock, or some kind of intricate mechanism. And on the last page there is a small, hastily scribbled note: "The serpent will be quieted." It's a cryptic phrase, a bizarre clue that has nothing to do with a kidnapping or a murder. What could it mean? The serpent? The marquise? The king? The king's men have found a man, a name, and a link to a powerful secret society. But they have also entered a world of codes and symbols, a world of hidden meanings. The case of the king's mistress is not just a simple disappearance. It is a conspiracy, a tangle of politics and ideology that reaches into the heart of the French monarchy. And you are here, in this quiet, unassuming room, at the very centre of it all. The hunt is now a game of chess, a battle of wits and secrets. And you know, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that the players in this game are not who they seem to be. The hunt for the Duke, Jean-Baptiste de Villiers, takes on a new, more urgent tone. The king's detectives, now armed with a name, leave the quiet confines of the philosophical society and venture out into the bustling, noisy streets of Paris. Their search leads them to one of the Duke's known haunts, a shadowy gambling house tucked away in a nondescript alley. This is a place of vice and desperate hope, where men lose fortunes on the turn of a card and secrets are sold for the price of a drink. You are a silent observer in this sordid world, a ghost in a place filled with very real, very dangerous people. Delaunay, the lead detective, is in his element here. He knows the rhythms of this world, the unspoken rules. He walks into the gambling house, his face a mask of stone, his eyes scanning the faces of the players and the proprietors. He's not looking for the Duke. He knows the Duke is too clever to be here. He's looking for a servant, a footman, a valet, someone who knows the Duke's comings and goings, someone who can be bribed or cajoled into revealing a secret. He finds his man in a back room, a small, nervous valet who serves the Duke. The man, with a face full of fear and a few coins in his pocket, finally gives up a name. Marie Claire. She's a chambermaid in the Duke's private residence, a young woman known for her loyalty to her master. She, the valet says, has been missing for 2 days ever since the Duke's sudden departure. This is a critical piece of information. The Duke did not just vanish. He vanished with his chambermaid. The detectives rush to the Duke's townhouse, a grand, imposing building in one of the city's more fashionable districts. They break the king's rule and enter the house without a warrant, an act of sheer audacity that shows how desperate they are. The house is silent and empty, the furniture shrouded in white sheets, as if its owner has been gone for weeks, not just days. But it's not entirely empty. They find the chambermaid, Marie-Claire, in a small, cramped servants' quarter, locked in a tiny closet, her hands bound, a gag in her mouth. She is alive, but barely. She is terrified. Her eyes wide with a fear that goes beyond the simple fear of being locked in a closet. She tells them her story, a tale that finally begins to connect the dots. The Duke, she says, was not a regular visitor to the Philosophical Society. He was a man obsessed with a single thing, a secret society known as the Watchmakers. It was a group, she explains, that believed the world was a great machine, and that they, the Watchmakers, had the power to understand its inner workings. They believed that by controlling the symbols, the codes, the very language of the world, they could control its destiny. This is a quirky tidbit that no mainstream history book would ever contain. The belief systems of fringe societies. While the Enlightenment thinkers spoke of reason, these men spoke of a kind of cosmic, esoteric control. It's a fascinating, bizarre side note to the official history of the era, a reminder that the Age of Reason was also an age of deep-seated superstition and bizarre philosophical beliefs. The Duke was not a man of Enlightenment thought. He was a man of magic and myth. And then she gives them the final, crucial clue. The Duke, she says, had been carrying a heavy satchel for weeks, a satchel he never let out of his sight. He was obsessed with it, she says, and on the night of the ball she saw him put something in the satchel. A locket. Not just any locket, but a locket that belonged to the Marquise de Pompadour, a locket that she had worn every day for years, a locket that contained a miniature portrait of the king. Marie-Claire, in her fear, had not said anything, had simply watched as the Duke slipped the locket into his bag. It was the last thing she saw before he locked her in the closet and vanished. Historians still argue whether the Duke's interest in the Marquise's locket was a personal obsession or part of a larger, more symbolic plot. Was he simply a madman, a collector of trophies, or was the locket a key to a larger puzzle, a symbol of the king's power that he needed to control? The locket, a small, intimate object, has now become the central clue in a vast, sprawling conspiracy. It's a testament to the way that small, personal objects can take on a world of symbolic meaning, a key to understanding a much larger, more complex story. The king's detectives now have a name, a motive, and a final, tantalizing clue. The Duke, a man of power and influence, is a member of a secret society, and he has a personal, chilling trophy, the Marquise's locket. The hunt has now moved beyond a simple disappearance. It is a hunt for a man who is not just a kidnapper, but a fanatic, a man who has taken the king's mistress as a symbol, a part of a larger, grander scheme. The Marquise, you realise, was not just a victim of a crime. She was a target of a belief system, a pawn in a game of cosmic significance. The Duke's motivation is not a simple lust for power. It is something much more complex, much more dangerous. He's not just a kidnapper, he is a fanatic. The search now has a new, more sinister purpose. It is a race against time, a race to find the Duke before he can complete his final, terrible act. The fate of the Marquise, you know, is now inextricably linked to the fate of the king and the future of France itself. The trail of the Duke, Jean-Baptiste de Villiers, leads you and the king's detectives to a small, secluded house on the outskirts of Paris, a place far from the bustling streets and the watchful eyes of the city. The house is a model of discretion, with its high walls and its overgrown garden, a place where a person could disappear without a trace. It's a temporary hideout, a place of transit, not a final destination. Delaunay and his men break down the door, their faces grim, their pistols drawn. The house is empty, but not abandoned. There are signs of a hurried departure. A half-eaten loaf of bread on a table, a few crumpled maps on the floor, a single unlit candle. The Duke is gone, but he hasn't been gone for long. They're close. The scent of their prey is fresh in the air. And then they find something that turns the entire case on its head. In a small locked desk in the main study, they find a series of letters. They are addressed to the Duke, and they are written in a familiar, elegant hand. They are from Madame du Houssaye, the Marquise's lady-in-waiting, the same nervous woman who followed the Marquise out of the ball. This is a betrayal of the most profound kind, a knife plunged into the Marquise's back by one of her closest and most trusted allies. The letters are a chilling read. They detail the Marquise's comings and goings, her schedule, her habits, her fears. They speak of a long-standing plot, a conspiracy to remove the Marquise from her position, and to use her disappearance as a way to expose the king's weakness and to create a power vacuum at court. The letters are filled with codes and symbols, references to the watchmakers and their grand design, a plan to topple the monarchy and to replace it with a new, more perfect order. This is a mainstream historical fact of the era. Betrayals at court were common, a way for ambitious people to climb the social ladder, but this is different. This is not a simple betrayal for money or power. It is an ideological betrayal, a betrayal of a woman she was supposed to protect, a betrayal for the sake of a belief system. Madame d'Orsay, you realise, was not a loyal servant. She was a revolutionary, a fanatic, a woman who believed that the greater good justified any personal cruelty. Historians still argue whether Madame d'Orsay was a true believer in the revolutionary ideals of the secret societies, or if she was a simple pawn, a woman who was manipulated by the Duke and his fellow watchmakers. Was she a mastermind, a cunning double agent who played both sides of the game, or was she a victim of her own ambition, a woman who bit off more than she could chew? The letters are inconclusive. They are filled with her details, but they lack her motivation. The scholarly debate is an endless loop of conjecture, a puzzle with a missing piece. You also notice a quirky tidbit in the letters, a small detail that no one else would have noticed. Madame d'Orsay, a woman known for her delicate and feminine handwriting, has a single small sketch in the margin of one of the letters. It is a drawing of a serpent, a tiny coiled snake with a crown on its head, and beneath it a single phrase, "The serpent is the key." It's a chillingly symbolic reference, a clue that points to a hidden meaning, a secret that lies at the heart of the conspiracy. The king's men now have a new name, a new suspect, and a new direction. The plot is not a simple kidnapping. It is a conspiracy, a political and ideological plot that reaches into the very heart of the king's court. The betrayal of Madame d'Orsay is a sign that the conspiracy is far more widespread and far more dangerous than anyone had previously imagined. The Duke is a powerful man, but he is just a part of a larger, more sinister machine. The hunt is no longer a search for a missing mistress. It is a race to stop a revolution. The fate of the Marquise is now inextricably linked to the fate of the king and the future of France itself. The king's detectives have a new, more urgent mission. They must find the Duke, they must find Madame d'Orsay, and they must find out what the watchmakers have planned. The clock is ticking, and the serpent, it seems, is about to strike. The stage is set for a final, terrible confrontation. The conspiracy is now clear, but the trail is growing cold. The king's detectives, now with the added burden of finding the treacherous Madame de Courset, are relentless in their pursuit. They have a new direction, a new focus. The powerful Duc de Richelieu. Remember him from the Hall of Mirrors? The man whose hatred for the Marquise was a thinly veiled secret? The letters found in the Duc de Villiers' house, a small cryptic note at the end of one of them, spoke of a shadow, a powerful ally at court who was helping to cover their tracks. The detectives, with a chilling certainty, now know who that shadow is. Delaunay and his men, a small grim-faced group, make their way to the Duc de Richelieu's grand townhouse. This is a bold move, an act of defiance against the established order. A duke, a man of his standing and influence, is not accustomed to being questioned by a man of Delaunay's rank. But Delaunay has the king's authority, a silent, all-powerful weapon that trumps all social niceties. The duke, a man of immense charm and a razor-sharp wit, receives them in his study, a room filled with books and fine art. He's a master of the polite lie, the casual dismissal. He listens to their questions with a look of bored indifference. He denies any knowledge of the Duc de Villiers or the Marquise's disappearance. He claims he was at his country estate on the night of the ball, a perfectly plausible alibi. He has witnesses, he says, his servants, his family, a few neighbours. His alibi is built on the shifting sands of aristocratic politeness and the power of his name. Who would dare to question the word of the Duc de Richelieu? This is a mainstream historical fact of the era. Alibis were often based on a person's social standing and the testimony of their loyal servants. A nobleman's word was often taken as truth, and the word of a servant was often dismissed as a lie. Delaunay, however, is not a man of social standing. He is a man of facts, a man of evidence. He knows that the alibi is just a part of the performance. The Duke is too calm, too poised. He is acting a part, and Delaunay knows it. Historians still argue whether the Duc de Richelieu was a genuine conspirator, or simply a man who took advantage of the situation. Some scholars believe that he was the true mastermind behind the plot, a powerful figure who used the ideological zeal of the watchmakers to achieve his own political ends. Others argue that he was simply a passive opportunist, a man who saw the Marquise's disappearance as a chance to consolidate his own power at court. His actions were, in a sense, a scholarly debate in and of themselves. Was he a true villain or just a product of his time, a man who played the game of power with a ruthless efficiency? You also notice a quirky tidbit that no official report would ever contain. As the Duke is speaking, his hand rests on a small marble bust on his desk, a bust of Caesar Augustus. He traces the lines of the Emperor's face with his finger, a gesture of profound, almost religious contemplation. It is a strange, almost unsettling gesture, a sign that the Duke sees himself not just as a nobleman, but as a kind of kingmaker, a man who can shape the destiny of a nation with a single, well-placed move. He's not just a rival of the Marquise, he's a rival of the king himself. His ambition is not just for a place in the court, but for a place in history. Delaunay, a man of instinct, sees this. He knows that the Duke is a man who sees the world not in terms of right and wrong, but in terms of power and weakness. The Duke's alibi is a lie, he knows it, but he has no proof. He cannot simply arrest a Duke on a hunch. He needs evidence, something to connect him to the watchmakers and their plot. He needs something more than a suspicious glance and a strange gesture. The Duke, sensing the detective's frustration, allows himself a small, satisfied smirk. He has won this round. He has given them an alibi that is, on the surface, unassailable. He has demonstrated the power of his social standing, the power of a name. He has shown them that they are playing a game they cannot win, but Delaunay is not done. He has a trick up his sleeve, a question that he has been saving for the perfect moment. He looks the Duke in the eye and asks, "Where is the serpent?" The Duke's face, for a split second, loses its composure. His eyes widen, his hand slips from the bust of Caesar. It is a raw, unvarnished look of fear, a look that speaks of a secret that has just been exposed. The Duke, a man of a million masks, has just revealed his true face. The question, so simple and so strange, has hit its mark. The Duke quickly recovers, his mask of composure snapping back into place. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he says, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained. But the moment has passed. The lie is already in the air. Delaunay has his answer. He knows the Duke is not just a conspirator, he's a key player, a man who knows the secrets of the watchmakers and their hidden plan. The hunt for the Marquise has just become a hunt for the most powerful man in France, a hunt that could bring down the entire monarchy. The Duc de Richelieu's alibi, you now know, is a flimsy construct of lies and half-truths, but it's a construct that, for now, remains unassailable. The king's detectives have a name, a motive, and a confirmation of his guilt, but they lack the hard evidence to bring him in. They need something more, something that can't be explained away by a well-placed lie or a loyal servant. They need a clue that is both undeniable and unbreakable. Delaunay returns to the Duc de Villiers' townhouse, a place that now feels less like a crime scene and more like an ideological headquarters. He and his men search the house again, this time with a new purpose. They are not looking for clues to a kidnapping. They are looking for the key to a conspiracy, a key that will unlock the secrets of the watchmakers. They tear through the Duke's books, they rip open the furniture, they pull apart the floorboards. They are looking for something that has been hidden, something that has been placed there for a reason. And they find it. Tucked inside the binding of an old leather-bound book on clockmaking, they find a single sheet of paper, a folded note. It is not a letter or a diagram. It is a cryptic note, a puzzle, a series of symbols and phrases that seem to have no meaning. It is written in a hurried, almost illegible hand, and it speaks of a series of locations and times. The serpent will be quieted at the place of the sun setting. The key will be found at the crossroads of the old and the new. The lock will be opened when the eye of the king is blind. It is a note filled with a bizarre, nonsensical language. This is a mainstream historical fact of the era. Secret societies often used codes and ciphers to protect their secrets. The Masons, the Rosicrucians, the various philosophical clubs, they all had their own unique language, a series of symbols and phrases that only the initiates could understand. The note is not a piece of evidence in a crime. It is a piece of a larger, more complex puzzle, a part of a language that only a handful of people in all of France could understand. Delaunay, a man of simple practicality, is at a loss. He can't make heads or tails of it. He is a detective, not a philosopher or a cryptographer. He needs help. He takes the note to the one man he knows can help him, a brilliant but reclusive scholar who specializes in ancient languages and forgotten codes. The scholar, an old man with a face like a road map and a library filled with books that have not been opened in a century, takes the note and studies it for hours. He finally looks up, his eyes filled with a kind of profound, unsettling knowledge. The note, he says, is not a simple cipher. It is a kind of symbolic language, a secret code used by the watchmakers. The serpent, he explains, is the marquise, a woman who they saw as a kind of poison, a corrupting influence on the king. The place of the sun setting is the Place de la Concorde, the site of a famous public execution. The key, he explains, is the locket. The locket you remember the Duke stealing from the Marquise's apartment. The crossroads of the old and the new is a specific intersection in Paris, where an ancient Roman road intersects with a newly built boulevard. The lock, he says, is a secret symbolic lock, a kind of ceremonial key that opens the way to a new era. The Eye of the King is the king's own private spy network, the one that Delaunay himself works for. Historians still argue whether the watchmakers were a genuine threat to the monarchy, or just a group of deluded idealists playing a dangerous game. Were they truly trying to start a revolution, or were they just using the language of revolution to justify their personal ambitions and their petty vendettas? The note is both proof of their seriousness and a symbol of their madness. It is a sign that they were not just kidnappers, they were revolutionaries. You also notice a quirky tidbit that the scholar, in his deep knowledge, missed. The note has a single, almost invisible smudge of ink at the bottom, a tiny, almost imperceptible fingerprint. It is not the Duke's. It is too small, too delicate. It is a woman's. It is the fingerprint of Madame du Hausset, the Marquise's treacherous lady-in-waiting. It is a sign that she was not just a pawn in the game. She was a player, a woman who helped to write the rules. The king's detectives now have a new, terrifying truth. The plot is not a simple kidnapping for ransom or a simple conspiracy to seize power. It is a ritual, a symbolic execution, a plan to quiet the serpent and to use her as a symbol of the old, corrupt monarchy that they want to overthrow. The note, so cryptic and so strange, is the key to everything. It is the map to the conspiracy, the key to the Duke's plan, and the final horrifying clue to the Marquise's fate. The king's detectives have a new, more terrifying mission. They are no longer just trying to find a missing person. They are trying to stop a ritual murder, a symbolic act that could set off a chain reaction of violence and revolution. The clock is ticking, and the serpent, you realise, is not just a metaphor. It is the Marquise herself, a woman who is about to be sacrificed on the altar of a revolutionary ideal. The hunt is now a race against time, a race to save the Marquise from a fate worse than death, to be a pawn in a revolutionary plot. The king's detectives, armed with the decoded message, now understand the full scope of the conspiracy. It is not just the Duc de Villiers, a mad idealist, or the Duc de Richelieu, a cunning opportunist. The plot extends far deeper, into the very heart of the French monarchy itself. The Eye of the King, the scholar had explained, was the king's own private network of spies, the very network that Delaunay and his men belonged to. The phrase, "the Eye of the King is blind," was a signal, a sign that the conspiracy had a mole, a traitor, someone on the inside who was feeding them information and protecting them from the king's authority. Delaunay, a man of simple, unshakable loyalty to his king, is hit by this revelation with the force of a physical blow. The betrayal is not just an idea, it is a fact. He knows that his own network is compromised, that the very people he trusts, the very people he works with, may be part of a plot to kill the Marquise and to bring down the king. He can trust no one, not even his own men. The hunt has just become a hunt for a ghost, a traitor who is hiding in plain sight. He gathers his men in a small private room in a rented house in Paris. He looks at their faces, men he has fought beside for years, men he has trusted with his life. He knows he cannot tell them the truth. He cannot tell them that one of them is a traitor. He simply tells them that the case has taken a new, more dangerous turn, that the conspiracy is far more widespread than they had initially believed. He tells them that from now on they will work in pairs, and that they will not share their information with anyone, not even with their partners. He gives them a new mission, a new direction. They must now search for a man who fits the description of a royal guard, a man who smells of smoke, and who has a secret second life as a revolutionary. This is a mainstream historical fact of the era. The Royal Guard, for all its power and prestige, was not immune to the ideological currents of the time. Many of its members were from the minor nobility, a class that was often frustrated by its lack of political power and its exclusion from the king's inner circle. They were a hotbed of discontent, a kind of powder keg waiting for a spark. The idea that a member of the Royal Guard could be a part of a revolutionary plot is not a stretch. It is a chillingly plausible scenario. The detectives, now divided and suspicious, fan out into the city. They begin their search not in the back alleys, but in the taverns and barracks where the Royal Guard socialises. They are looking for a man who talks too much, a man who holds his drink too long, a man who, in a moment of carelessness, reveals his true allegiances. They are looking for a whisper, a glance, a sign that someone is not who they seem to be. You also notice a quirky tidbit that no official record would ever contain. The detectives, in their desperation, have started to use a series of secret codes, a language of their own invention. They refer to their quarry as the Serpent's Keeper, to the Duke as the Watchmaker, and to the Marquise as the Lost Key. It's a strange, almost theatrical language, a way for them to give meaning to a world that has suddenly become meaningless. It is a sign that they too are being consumed by the conspiracy, that they too are beginning to see the world in terms of symbols and metaphors. Historians still argue whether the conspiracy of the Royal Guard was a genuine organised plot or just a loose collection of malcontents. Was there a single, charismatic leader who brought them all together? Or were they just a group of angry young men who found a common language in the ideals of the watchmakers? The debate is an endless loop of conjecture, a puzzle with a missing piece. But for Delaunay, the question is not an academic one. It is a question of survival. The search is long and difficult. The Royal Guard is a tight-knit community, a place where loyalty is paramount and secrets are kept. But the detectives, in their desperation, are able to find a lead. A young, inexperienced guard, a man named Pierre, who is a little too eager to talk, a little too eager to impress. He tells them of a man, a sergeant in his regiment, who has been acting strangely. A man who spends his nights in the city, not in the taverns, but in the back rooms of philosophical clubs. A man who smells of smoke. A man who is known for his secret second life. His name is Sergeant Louis Dubois. The king's detectives have found their man, their mole, their traitor. He's not a duke or a scholar, but a simple soldier. A man who, in his own way, has been consumed by the ideals of a secret society. He is the Serpent's Keeper, the man who was tasked with silencing the Marquise and bringing her to her final, terrible fate. The hunt is now a race against time. The king's detectives must find Sergeant Dubois before he can complete his final, terrible act. The fate of the Marquise is now in their hands. A race against a man who is a symbol of everything that is wrong with the world. A man who is a living, breathing part of a conspiracy to end the monarchy. The king's detectives, now knowing who their man is, move with a terrifying sense of purpose. The hunt for the Marquise de Pompadour, which began in the gilded halls of Versailles, has now come to a dark and final conclusion. They find Sergeant Louis Dubois not in a tavern or a barracks, but in a small rented room above a blacksmith's workshop on the outskirts of Paris, the same workshop whose smoky smell had been a constant haunting clue throughout their investigation. The man, a solid, burly figure with a face like a slab of granite, doesn't resist. He knows the game is up. He is a soldier, and he knows when a battle is lost. Delaunay and his men bring him to a secluded, windowless room, a place of silent, unblinking authority. The sergeant sits on a hard wooden chair, his hands bound, his face grim. He doesn't deny his involvement. He doesn't plead his innocence. He simply looks at Delaunay, and with a kind of quiet, weary defiance he begins to tell his story. His voice is a low, monotone rumble, a sound that fills the silence with a cold, brutal truth. He is not a murderer, he says, not in the way they think. He is a man who was wronged, a man who, like many in his regiment, was frustrated by the king's extravagance and the queen's piety. He and his fellow guards, a small tight-knit group, found a home in the Watchmakers, a society that promised a new world, a world where a man was judged not by his birth, but by his worth. The society, he says, had a grand design, a plan to expose the king's weakness and to create a power vacuum at court. He was not a member of the philosophical societies. He was a soldier, a man of action. He was the one who was tasked with the final act, the final ritual. He tells them of the night of the ball, of how Madame du Hausset, the treacherous lady-in-waiting, led the Marquise to the secret staircase. He tells them of how he met them at the bottom, in the cold, dark depths of the palace. He tells them of how the Marquise, a woman of grace and courage, did not scream or cry out. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with a sad, profound understanding. She knew what was happening. She knew that her time was up. He confesses to taking her to a waiting carriage, to driving her through the dark, winding streets of Paris, to a small, abandoned chapel on the outskirts of the city. He tells them of the ritual, a chilling ceremony that was designed to quiet the serpent and to use her as a symbol of the old corrupt monarchy that they wanted to overthrow. He describes the altar, the candles, the strange symbolic language they used. He tells them of how the Duc de Villiers, a man he saw as a kind of mad priest, used the Marquise's locket, a symbol of the king's power, to lock away the monarchy, to symbolically end the old world and to begin the new one. This is a mainstream historical fact of the era. Rituals and symbolism were often used by secret societies to give their actions a sense of legitimacy and grandeur. They were not just revolutionaries, they were artists of a new kind of world, a world where the old symbols of power were to be replaced by new ones. The sergeant's confession is not just a story of a crime, it is a story of a belief system, a world of symbols and ideals that was far more dangerous than any political plot. Historians still argue whether Sergeant Dubois' confession was a true and unvarnished account, or a carefully constructed narrative designed to protect his fellow conspirators and to give his actions a sense of noble purpose. Was he a true believer, a man who was willing to die for his ideals? Or was he a pawn, a man who was manipulated by the powerful Duc de Villiers and the ambitious Duc de Richelieu? The debate is an endless loop of conjecture, a puzzle with no clear answer. You also notice a quirky tidbit, a small, almost invisible detail that the sergeant mentions almost as an afterthought. He says that the Marquise, in her final moments, did not speak a word. She simply looked at him, and in her eyes, he says, he saw a kind of profound, gentle pity. She pitied me, he says, his voice cracking for the first time. She pitied me for what I had become. It's a small detail, a fleeting moment, but it speaks volumes about the kind of woman the Marquise was, a woman who, in her final moments, found a way to be human, a way to be compassionate, even to the man who was about to take her life. And then, he gives them the final, most terrifying part of his confession. After the ritual was complete, he says, the Duc de Villiers and his men left, leaving him alone with the Marquise. His orders were to dispose of the body, to make it disappear, to return the serpent to the earth. He tells them of how he took her to a secluded part of the woods, a place he knew from his childhood, a place where he used to hunt with his father. He tells them of how he dug a shallow grave, and of how, in the stillness of the night, with the stars as his only witnesses, he buried the king's mistress. The king's detectives have their answer. The Marquise de Pompadour is not just missing, she is dead. She's buried in a shallow, unmarked grave on the outskirts of Paris, a place that no one knows, a place that no one can ever find. The hunt is over. The mystery is solved. But the truth is more haunting, more terrible than anyone had ever imagined. The king's mistress, the most powerful woman in France, was not just a victim of a crime. She was a victim of a belief system, a pawn in a game of symbols and ideals that ended in her symbolic and literal death. The sergeant's confession is the final, chilling piece of a puzzle that has been a long time in the making. The king's detectives have their answer, but the truth is too terrible to be told. Delaunay, a man whose loyalty to the king is his most defining trait, knows that he cannot, in good conscience, tell his monarch that his beloved mistress was not just kidnapped, but ritually murdered and buried in an unmarked grave. He knows that such a revelation would shatter the king's fragile psyche, that it would expose the deep rot at the heart of the monarchy, that it would ignite a public scandal that could lead to a revolution. And so, he makes a decision. a terrible, necessary decision. He will not tell the king the truth. He presents the king with a carefully constructed lie, a narrative that is plausible, respectful, and most importantly contained. He tells the king that the Marquise, a woman of fragile health, had fled the court to escape her enemies. He tells him that she was seeking a private life, a life of peace, and that she had simply vanished into the vastness of the French countryside. He tells him that she'd entrusted a small group of her loyal servants to keep her secret, and that they, in their loyalty, have taken her to a place where no one can find her. He tells him that she is alive and well, but that she has chosen to live the rest of her life in quiet anonymity. The king, a man who desperately wants to believe this lie, accepts it. It is a story that protects his pride, that preserves the illusion of his power, that allows him to believe that his great love has not been ended by a single, terrible act of violence. He orders that the Marquise's disappearance be officially announced as a retreat for her health, and that all further inquiries be ceased. The court, which had been in a state of muted panic, breathes a collective sigh of relief. The nobles can now go back to their plotting and their posturing. The king can go back to his duties, and the scandal, the deep, dark truth of it, is buried. But it is not forgotten. This is a mainstream historical fact that gives the story its enduring power. The official story of the Marquise's disappearance was that she had simply retreated from court life due to ill health, and that she had died a few years later at her estate. The truth, the secret, was known only to a handful of people, and it was a secret they took to their graves. The story of her vanishing without a trace, the haunting mystery of it, has been a part of French folklore and history for centuries. Historians still argue whether the king's public acceptance of the lie was an act of genuine relief or a cold political calculation. Was he truly so blind with grief that he could not see the truth? Or did he simply choose to ignore the truth because it was politically expedient to do so? The scholarly debate is an endless loop of conjecture, a puzzle with no clear answer. But you, the silent observer, know the truth. You know that the king, a man who saw the world in terms of power, chose the lie because it was the most powerful weapon he had. You also know a quirky tidbit that no historian would ever record. The fate of the two dukes and the traitorous lady-in-waiting. They were not arrested. They were not executed. They were simply disappeared. They were taken by the king's private spies and sent to the farthest, darkest corners of the French Empire, to a life of exile and isolation. The king, in his cold, calculating fury, did not want a public trial, a public scandal. He wanted a silent, final revenge. He wanted them to disappear, to vanish without a trace, just like the woman they had killed. The watchmakers had wanted to quiet the serpent, and to replace the old world with a new one. But the king, in his own way, showed them that he was a master of the game. He simply removed the players. The story, however, does not end here. The mystery, the legend of the vanished mistress, continued to whisper through the halls of Versailles, through the back alleys of Paris, through the dark corners of French history. The ghost of the Marquise, a woman who had dared to be more than a mistress, a woman who had dared to be a force of nature, continued to haunt the French monarchy. Her disappearance was a symbol of the deep rot, the ideological rot that was eating away at the foundations of the monarchy. It was a sign that the king's power was not as absolute as he wanted it to be. It was a premonition of the revolution, a sign that the old world was about to be swept away. You're now back in the present, a ghost in a modern world. The Palace of Versailles is a museum, a monument to a world that no longer exists. The Hall of Mirrors is filled with tourists, their cameras flashing. Their voices a foreign sound in a place that used to be a stage for a silent, deadly drama. But you, the silent observer, can still feel the echoes of the past. You can still feel the cold, heavy air of the empty royal bedchamber. You can still feel the fear and the confusion of the initial alarm. You can still feel the cold, calculating fury of the king. You can still feel the terror of a woman who knows she's about to be silenced. And you can still hear the final, haunting confession of a man who was, in his own way, a victim of a belief system. The story, the legend, lives on. And so, the tale of the king's mistress who vanished without a trace comes to a close. The truth, as you now know, is far more complex and far more terrifying than the official story. It is a story of love, of betrayal, of power, of ideology, and of the deep, dark secrets that lie beneath the surface of history. But now, it is time for you to let go of this world, to let go of the ghosts and the legends and to come back to the present. The journey is over, the mystery is solved, but the memory of the Marquise, a woman who, in her own way, helped to change the course of history, will live on. The sounds of the palace have faded. The whispers of the past are quieting down. You can feel the stillness of your own room now, the cool air on your face, the soft hum of the fan you might have turned on. Take a deep breath. Let the story settle in your mind, not as a source of fear, but as a kind of dream, a journey you've just taken. The Marquise, the King, the traitors, the whole world of Versailles. They're just stories now, ghosts in the history books. They can't hurt you. They can only remind you of the strange, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying things that have happened in this world. There's nothing left to worry about. The sun is on its way, bringing with it a new day and a new calm. It's time to let the mind drift and to find some rest. Sweet dreams.